What if there was a timeline where Seto Kaiba was never the bad guy, but secretly the one pulling the strings, protecting the world from the shadows? It seems like a pretty far-fetched idea. But the more I think about it, the more I kinda like it. And I think you will as well. This is my idea. What if Seto spent years pretending to be a character called Seto Kaiba? However, in reality he was working to suppress and contain the power of Duel Monsters. For example, before the existence of the Egyptian god cards, the most powerful cards in the game were the Blue Eyes White Dragon. And knowing the destruction these cards can cause in the wrong hands, Seto Kaiba spent years hunting them down, even ensuring the cards he is unable to contain are destroyed, all so that this power doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Now, why would Seto be doing this? Well, Seto has an ancient Egyptian past, and in some shape or form would still be connected to pre-Seto. So maybe Seto will receive images or flashbacks in his dreams, seeing the incredible power of the Duel Monster cards. Seto felt like it was his responsibility to contain and ensure a Duel Monster war doesn't happen, just like it did several thousand years ago. He makes this his mission to make sure that this power from the ancient past doesn't come and overwhelm and destroy everything he had built for his brother, because deep down Seto Kaiba is a kind person.
So I'd say your brother has as much of a shot at winning as your company does of ever succeeding! Whoa, now that was pretty low.
Now he portrays the character of ignorance and obliviousness, dismissing Yugi on several occasions, and he portrayed that character well. To Yugi and his friends, they believed Seto Kaiba didn't believe in the ancient past or the shadow games, but the reason Seto kept up his pretense was to hide the fact that he's actually studying Yugi, or more specifically, studying the Millennium items, because these items are actually the main link to Duel Monsters. They have the ability to summon and contain monster spirits, as well as manipulate them to their user's will. Now Seto would have spent enough time with Yugi to realize that Yugi was an ally and not a threat. However, Yugi's Millennium Puzzle was always attracting evil, so for Seto to be prepared for the coming evil, Seto became Yugi's rival, learning everything he could about the Millennium Puzzle and the spirit which lived inside. The only time Seto put his life on the line was against Pegasus, as Pegasus had kidnapped his little brother Mokuba. Now in this one instance, Seto had no choice but to run in without a plan. But even in this instance, Seto had a backup strategy. He created a new dual disc. This dual disc was supposed to offset Pegasus' Millennium Eye. Seto tried new technology in order to get the upper hand on Pegasus. However, as we know, with Mokuba as a hostage, this didn't go to plan. However, with Kaiba spending time in the Shadow Realm with his soul trapped in a Yu-Gi-Oh card, that was the last straw for Seto Kaiba. Now for Kaiba to stand a fighting chance against such power, he needed power of his own, and that was handed to him right on his doorstep when Ishizu introduced him to the Egyptian god cards and gave him Obelisk the Tormentor. Seto has found his way back into the fight. He thought of using the god cards to fight against the powers of ancient magic and Duel Monster spirits, as well as keeping the Egyptian god cards away from mankind, away from the people who would use it for evil. Seto studied each card very closely, finding their weaknesses if he ever had to face them, even decoding Ra and all his secret abilities. However, as we know, this didn't end well for Seto, since Yugi ended up winning and obtaining all 3 Egyptian god cards. However, it wasn't the end of the road, because Seto knew deep down he could trust Yugi with the god cards. Plus, we already established Seto knew if he ever had to face the god cards again, he knew enough about them to hopefully find a contingency plan. Which is why time after time we see Seto Kaiba run simulations on how to beat the 3 god cards. So if ever Yugi turned to the dark side or the cards were stolen, Seto would be ready. Now with Seto's plan to harness the power of the god cards being a failure, Seto turned to what he knew best, which was technology, and began to construct a device which could counter or nullify the power of magic, which we saw in the dark side of dimensions, which was the unveiling of a new dual disc. This dual disc had the ability to use your own human emotions and amplify them as a defense against any unknown mystic item, Kaiba finally had a defense system in place as a final wall against any shadow magic shenanigans. Now the idea was, guys, that Seto was playing a character each time he lost or faced defeat, and was just using it as a learning curve. He adapts and builds countermeasures for things he believes is out of usual human comprehension. Seto would be secretly helping Yugi to take down threats to society, whilst also studying and analysing Yugi's power and his weaknesses if the day ever came that Seto had to put a stop to Yugi as well. I always thought this would be an interesting idea, a secret guardian. Maybe there could be a twist at the end of the show where Yugi and his friends discover all the work Seto had done in the background, the amount of time Seto has saved humanity or their own lives without asking for reward or acknowledgement. All this time they would realise that Seto was a misunderstood person, and I kinda like that idea.